Hi, I'm Iris from Madras. I have seen some familiar faces on this venue, and I'm very much looking forward for your feedback on my presentation. So I altered the title at the very last minute back to the original one I want to do. That is to tell the story about Tibetan teenagers who crossed the border just for education. I would try to make some contribution on the comparative paradigm, but I'm not sure how much I can do it. So let's start with the story. So this paper was rewritten from 2 chapters of my MA's thesis. I did my 5 months fieldwork back in 2012, working in Tibetan children's village in Upper Dharamshala. And as a trainer for the Chinese language teachers to be, they are Tibetans. They came from Tibet and to become Chinese teacher in the Tibetan schools. So they're going to teach in the middle section. And I was...
The Tibetans who come to Dharamsala to teach Chinese?
Yes, yes. They are Tibetans who had finished 9 years education in the language medium as Mandarin Chinese, and they have migrated to Dharamshala years back. Yeah, so, okay. No problem. It's my expression. So I was there also as a free participant in the classes in the middle section and the senior section, and I have access to the hostels and the foster care institution. They call it home in the campus. So also some part of this paper draws evidence from my recently fieldwork done in the Xiahe place. I wonder if you know Xiahe. That is in the Amdo or Ado Tibet, and now is in part of the Gansu province. So I visited 1 primary school and 2 secondary schools there. So as a trainer in the school, I want to specifically tell you that I don't have any direct authorities on students. I basically, in the eyes of the students, I was sort of look like a Drogba and Han Chinese in a chupa, very confusing, running here and there, talking to everybody, asking a lot of questions, taking a lot of notes, and trying to tell good stories.
Chinese dress, Tibetan dress for those who didn't know.
Yes, thank you very much. So I did interviews with 60 students and 200 questionnaires with the students of the senior section, because in the senior section they use English as their language medium. So for Tibetan students in the refugee school, they often use mixed languages. So for example, they would speak like Gela Kongchok is Saudi. That means Gela in Tibetan means teacher, Kongchok is the name, and Is English, Saudi is Chinese, means sweeping the floor. So my Tibetan language, as described by my Tibetan teacher, is like a mouse. No, it's like a cat constantly trying to catch mice, put it into the bag without realizing there's actually a hole in the bag. So end up with hunger. So our common landing is to do the research on English, and part of it Chinese, if they have learned plenty Chinese back in Tibet. So, oh, great. So I also do some text analysis with the essay and the letters they sent me very kindly with their consent. So as the propaganda is shown in the Tibetan schools in exile under the PRC government and the Tibetan school in exile and under the PRC government, they are quite clear about the ideology and in the perspective, in the worldview, and in the attitudes. I was more interested in the schooling experiences of the children and teenagers, on the kind of reflexive understanding of my parents' education back in the 60s when Chiang Kai-shek's army first come to Taiwan and rule Taiwan. So they provide also ideological education there back in Taiwan. So I found an interesting narrative among the students in senior sections stating that their purpose of coming to India is for education. And among the students who came from Tibet, unlike those children who came at a very young age, let's say 5, 6, and sometimes being brought by their parents. Well, the decision-making of migration is not by them. The group of teenager students who migrated to India, or they escaped to India at the age of 12, 13, 14, they have more the senses of making this decision by themselves or along with their families. So on their narratives, maybe I should do this. So on their narratives, I find that after a few years studying in the Tibetan schools in exile, students who claim that prior to their coming to India, they know nothing about Tibet, they became very keen in the Tibet issues. And so I want to say something about this picture. Sorry, I didn't move it. I'm so sorry. I thought I was saying I was on the page 1, but it's clearly not. Should I move on? So I will just move on. Please bear with me for some time. So who are the agents who cross the border for education? They are the 20 to 25% of the population who comes to India by foot or by plane. No, it's fine. Yeah, it's fine. I will just continue. This time is precious. So the government settled all the refugees who came from Tibet in different kind of schools. So let's say if you are over 18, means you are adults, then they will put you in the school, the adult school, Sukaloja, and there students will not be provided with formal education. It's more like a life skill. This one. Yeah. This one? Okay. Okay. So it's more like a life skill courses that you will learn English there, and of course standardized Tibetan language there, along with some home science and other subjects help you to adapt to India. Well, they are a good number of students. They were actually more than 18 when they first arrived in India. They are 19, they are 20, they are 21. They pretended that they are under 18 in order to get into the refugee school that is subject to the minors, which provide their residential school. They provide good facilities, financial supports, and a lot of attentions to those students. And more importantly, in those kind of schools for minors, they will get eligible degree for them to enter the university, either in India or in the West. So, where were I? Yeah, so I sort of try to tell you a bit more about the thing crossing the border. So the number of the students who currently studying in India, I mean those who on documentation, that is under 18, the number is about 26,000 something in 78 schools. And before they come, the information about Tibetan schools, or they call it Dalai Lama schools in India, was mostly gathered by hearsay. And based on my interview, at least 10 grand of RMB you have to gather and pay for the broker or for the guy to be set in the group to come to India. And if you walk by foot, then it would take you like 1 month. 3 pairs of shoes and 6 pairs of socks. And it's very common you see children in the refugee school that they might have some damage in their eyesight or toes. So this experience of escaping from Tibet and of encountering the army at the border, and some of them have the actual experience being hunted by Gand army, would be with them for a quite long time and affects their construction of national identity. And what is a bit more interesting is that some of my informants told me that they have watched some Bollywood movies before they came, so they have a delusion that India might be a place, happy with songs and dance, and it turned out absolutely not. So, yeah. Okay, it moved, great. So,
That's the right one. You pressed it twice.
oh, sorry. So, who are the agents that I have seen? So why these vulnerable kids and teenagers had to went through this? So parents knowing that some of them may not see their kids again if they send them out of Tibet, and they might face penalties from the PRC and also some harassment by the PRC government. So why they still making the decision, and why the kids still making the decision to go out and take these life-risking decisions? So let's take a quick look on the development of education in Tibet. So before 20th century, the mainstream is monastic education, while most of the intellectuals in the society, they are monks, and the knowledge and the process of getting a knowledge is kept in the monastery. Only 20% in the society, they are illiterate, and among them, the number of boys is outweighed the girls. And ironically, the first modern education being set up in Tibet actually is brought by these ambans. Ambans, I would prefer to translate them as ambassadors from Qing dynasty. So they set up kind of educational institutions there, what we call 学堂, in Lhasa. And quickly in 1907, the first Mandarin Chinese school they also provide English lesson was set in Lhasa as well. And opened in 1939, the National Lhasa Primary School, established actually by the Department of Education, Republic of China. So there are some English people running English school and army schools in Tibet as well, most of them in Jiangzi or someplace nearby Shikaze. And but this school only be there for about 5 months. And according to the Chinese scholars, these schools were removed is because the abbots in the monastery think that these schools might damage the Buddhist Dharma. So secular school education become accessible for everyone actually happened when the Communist Party, the Liberation Army came to Tibet. So that is in 1949. So before 1949, the map of Tibet looked like this. In Chinese, we call it 大山区, 西藏大山区, the greater 3 zones of Tibet, or in Tibetan is Trikachosum. I'm sorry about my lame pronunciation. And after 1949, the map of Tibet became like this. So Tibet, after the division of PRC provinces, the authority of this vast land has been distributed to 5 provinces, actually. Well, the Yuzhang side, which is the west and the middle and a bit south side, went to TAR. And the Ado or Amdo side went to Qinghai, Sichuan, and Gansu. And the Kham side went to Sichuan and Yunnan. So the education issue of Tibet, in a great sense, has become business of these 5 provincial governments. So post-1949, what happened in the education development in Tibet? So from 1951 to 1958, public school, private school coexist in Tibet, and the education being taught in mixed language medium. So in 1951, first primary school set up in Chengdu, that is on the east side, where Tibet encountered China. It's under the strategy of the Communist Party that guns and armies on the front and drama and songs and schools following behind, trying to educate people how great communism is. So in 1950 to 1956, first Tibetan language textbook being generated in TAR, in Qinghai province, and in Gansu province. This is brought up by a group of Tibetan intellectuals and Tibetan local leaders that they try to put the knowledge of Tibetan language into a modern form and to prevail them with the children either from the more urban side or the village. But soon in 1958, the anti-right movement just damaged everything, and they prohibited Tibetan, they as the communist government, prohibited Tibetan as the education medium. So later on, 58 to 59 is the Great Leap, where nobody goes to school. At that time, everybody is at the farm earning the labor credit. And there's a short revival through civil movements. And I have read a case study in Sichuan around that time, and it was amazing. These local leaders came from the mountain side, and they just take out their money and rent a house, rebuild the place, and get all the teachers and tables, everything, and try to settle down the children and provide them with sufficient education. So from 1966 to 78, that's Cultural Revolution. Needless to say, again, in this period, nobody goes to school and nobody speaks Tibetan language. So in 1982, when the Constitution came out, in the Constitution, that the rights of ethnic minority should be equal to other people. Can I see? So also, along with the 1984 regional autonomous laws and the 1986, that's 9 years compulsory education being implemented in China. But in the beginning, it's not well done in the periphery region in China. So there should be a bilingual education for all the autonomous area, including Tibet. So under this bilingual education policy, that schools will be designed into two types. One type is Tibetan plus Mandarin. That means the main education media would be in Tibetan language, and plus Mandarin, Chinese courses, and some other maybe science or English courses conducted in Mandarin Chinese. And another type is Mandarin Chinese courses plus Tibetan. That means almost all the subjects will be taught in Mandarin and plus the Tibetan language courses. So, plus, other than this, a preferable policy also given to the Tibetan people, that is they have a percentage to add on the score when they do the entrance exam to college. And there are limited seats in different college that is especially for all Tibetans. So there are also endowments for school facilities. And I want to talk about 2004 to 2007, these two basics. These two basics basically influence the number of the students who came from Tibet to India for education. So I have 3 minutes left. How can I finish this? Okay, so the problems about education in Tibet for Tibetans overall is that once you drop out or miss the timing to go to school, there's no additional management for that. So which means if you drop out from the school, or if you unfortunately become a juvenile criminal, or if you live in a very remote area that you didn't get the chance to go to school, then you will get alternative choice in India. So these people from this background are the majority of students who came from Tibet to India for education in the past 15 years. And also there are some trust issues and the unstable flow of the teaching forces, which also happen in Tibetan schools in exile, and segregation policies to create Xizangban in the East Coast schools. So how about I just jump a bit? It's not moving.
Yeah, it's acting up since the.
Um,
There, now it's here. You want which one?
Tibetan education in exile. Now you've got that one at the back.
okay.
Is that good, or you want to go forward?
So I would just try to make good use of the 3 minutes or 2 minutes left. So what is the story that happened after 1959 when Dalai Lama, along with 80,000 people, Tibetans, come to India? That is, they create a government that is called Central Tibetan Administration now, established in Dharamshala. And in 1960, the Department of Education under the CTA is designed for handling the educational issues in India. So what is interesting about this CTA? It's like a state within a state. Well, it's function as a state apparatus in the arena of education, especially in the refugee school in India. Well, it doesn't have any other like jurisdiction, or it has people but no land. So this state apparatus only function for performance in Tibetan schools. So what are the Tibetan schools? They are different by the funds they get. One is Central Tibetan Schools, that is 100% financed by the Indian central government and it was halfly handled by the DOE under CTA, and in 2013 it will be coming under DOE CTA, and still get the 100% funding from the Indian taxpayers. And the second category is the individual body work function as NGOs. They set up schools in India and Nepal and Bhutan, and Tibetan Children's Village is this kind of schools. So this kind of schools, they have a better creativity in curriculum design, and they also have a better strategy to negotiate the space with the Indian Education Act. So on one side is in China that the policy based on 中华民族多元一体论, that means this 中华民族 discourse, no matter which diverse stream you come from, you will be united as one, as called 中华民族. So this 中华民族, 民族 is not as a nationality or ethnic group, it's more like a political term. So it's regardless of your ethnic background, you should be integrated by the coercive power of state and through school education to become part of 中华民族 and to revive PRC or whatever. And on the other hand, in India, or I said broadly in Tibetan schools in exile, that the state apparatus create another political propaganda that go against to the propaganda that provided by the PRC to self-justify its existence in India. So the national identity was constructed in the school as refugee with the premise that once you have a country and the country was lost in 1949, then you become a refugee. If you never regarded Tibet as an independent country, then the status of political refugee does not exist in discourse. Well, political refugee as in discourse or in the document of RC, that is another thing. So what I'm trying to say is by the limited information they can gather through hearsay or through past experiences, they choose to send their children out, or the teenagers of different background, they choose to come out for alternative, for second life, for better up choice, and to get the education in the media in standardized Tibetan and in English, and get into good universities, and then going back for a better job, and then going west, that is even much better. That is the argument I'm trying to make. So it's based on the preference of the language they choose to come to India for education, and it's also based on on trust to the states in PRC, and also this is established also because this past century school education on repeating the discourse that is created by the CTA government. I know this might be controversial. I expect to be controversial, and I want to get more doubts or feedback on this. And since my slides may not be working, or in a very slow way. I would just go to a short conclusion that despite the disciplines the young Tibetans get in the school education in refugee school, they are the different generation. They perform their agency out of the discipline, and they are an active agent in the school culture, and that is out of the expectation of the elder generation. And the other thing is escape for asylum or for further studies. That is an intriguing question. So they were labeling them as they're more like, you know, immigrants seeking for economic interest, or they are political refugees in the political, you know, correct sense. They are pursuing their freedom of religion and political identity. And actually, this paper wants to do something on the comparative on the coercive power on the state level, which is happening in the PRC school, and the coercive power on the institutional level, which is happening in the refugee school in India. But since I don't have my slides working here, so come to me, I'll be happy to discuss with you. So I would wrap up my presentation here. I hope you're with me so far.
Thank you very much, Iris, for for a subject that spans several conceptual tropes all in one, and I'm intrigued also by the kind of comparison you've done on schools that are run by the Tibetan government in exile, really, as we call them in India, and those of Tibet in China. I have, I think, a very, very interesting.
Or rather, bend it towards the direction of saying that this could be related to a greater support structure, which would mean domestic help for, but it could be a much broader issue of well-being, is what my concern was. And
Okay.
I wanted to ask you if you could, if I understood it right, when you say left behind category, you mean people who are like a member of the family migrating and the others left behind. So in that case, there is actually a lot of work on that category.
In India, yeah.
And a lot of that work is done by labor economists.
Okay, can we keep that to the questions, please?
And
Thank you.
No, there is a question.
Then can just get on with your question
And
then.
it relates to feminization of agricultural labor. And there is a lot of popular mapping of that in movies as well. One of the movies is called Behind, which deals with sexual deprivation of women left behind. So just wondering how all of these kind of things play out in the way
Thank you. All right.
And what very
Can we make that your last question, please? Because I'd like everyone to stick to the minimum of 2 questions, please, not 5 or 6. I'm terribly sorry, we are short of time. Ask your one question to the papers that were actually presented in this session, if there's one. Yeah, do you have a last question?
One for Daniel.
Thank you.
Something very brief, actually. When you talked about Raju Bandia gentleman, you said till he meets this westernized woman. I'm just wondering, why would you characterize that female protagonist as westernized?
Okay, right. Many questions by the first speaker. Please limit yourself to 2 maximum questions. Thank you. I'm going to take a round of couple of questions and then give you the floor.
Myself, Danish.
Yeah.
Myself, Danish Reza. I'm in MPhil SIS, Japanese Studies. My question to Daniel. First, one question and my one own observation.
Short
first,
observation.
Yes, obviously short. One line.
All right.
My question is that what big or biggest changes you see in India regarding economic migrant on screen last 2 decades? This is my question. And my observation is that in the whole slides you talked about economic migrants on screen in India regarding Bollywood. In India, 50% of population according to 2011 census is of women, but you didn't talk about them and their representation on screen. So what do you think about this also? Thank you so much.
Excellent. Please.
My question is to Iris. I was born in Tibet, and I think maybe I follow one of your study. I was born in Tibet and I have come to India in 1991 to study by crossing the Himalayas. And I studied in TCB. So back to the topic that you have talking about the education system in Tibetans in Tibet and Tibetans in India. I see, and maybe because of colonization and occupation from the Chinese part and lack of clarity on the status of Tibetans in India. Tibetan students, whether you are in India or whether you are in China, after education, after completing your higher education and after completing your colleges and universities, students face problems. In case of Tibet, the medium of languages is Chinese, and once you complete your graduation, you have to compete. You have to compete with the Chinese students in Chinese language test, and definitely there is a disadvantage, and that's why lots of Tibetans who have graduated from Chinese university, they face problems to get employment. And in terms of Tibetans in India, there is lack of clarity in terms of status of Tibetans, whether you fall under refugee or whether you are considered as a foreigner, because Tibetans in JNU are considered as a foreigner, and we get admission through foreign quota, and we pay foreign students pay, though it's very minimum, but we don't receive any scholarship or UGC scholarship from the Indian government. And after I am in Chinese studies PhD, and I'm not very sure whether I can teach in Indian university or whether I can get a government job. So what is your take on that?
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I think I'm going to allow them first to answer the round that has been, and you be the first one in the second round, please. Who would like to go first? I'll leave that amongst you. Charlotte.
Is that working?
Thanks. I actually also have
briefly, because...
I will be. And I also have a question
I wanted to ask to Danielle as well. Okay, so you asked me about how I conceptualize well-being. Yeah, that's a really tricky conceptual issue, and it's one I've mostly avoided. Actually, well-being is my sort of gloss on the things that I was interested in. When I conducted the fieldwork, I was interested in children's own sort of ideas about their happiness, where they were happier living. And so I asked questions about whether they were happier before or after migration. So I more or less avoided conceptualizing well-being. I found that very difficult to compare across countries. Well-being is a kind of category I've used to describe the things I specifically asked. And so for those children, what they talked about was whether they were happy, what they missed, what they liked about their native place, what they liked about the city, and which one they preferred living in. And then when I asked the parents, I asked them very broadly which place they thought was better for their children to grow up in, and which was better for them to settle in as adults. You mentioned about the collapse of family and social systems, and you related it to caste, the caste system in India. Yeah, I think that's really important. And this works in different ways in China and India. So in China, we might find that there isn't actually much to miss. For some of the children, there's not very much to miss in their native villages because of such an enormous scale of out-migration that some of the children told me, there's only old people there, you know? But the one-child policy has already reduced some of the kinship networks, and then the huge out-migration means that some of the children, some of the families had pretty much migrated and brought the children for schooling in the city because there were almost no children left in the rural school, and I think that's very important. That's quite different from the Indian context, whereas you pointed out the girls, well, all the children, but particularly the girls who talked about missing extended family members. I was trying to highlight the connection there to things like childcare and domestic tasks, because I think that was what was important in the schooling context. But you're absolutely right to say it's much broader than that. It's all different kinds of family, support networks, kinship relations, which I think are very, very important. Although there obviously is large-scale out-migration in India as well, I didn't find the same phenomenon of villages which have been almost completely emptied out, at least not in my sample. And finally, you mentioned about the left-behind population in India and pointed to the important work that's been done by labour economists on the feminization of agriculture. Absolutely, yeah. I know this work has been done. I guess what I was trying to get at when I said that the categories are different is this use of this term, the left behind, as a whole signifier for what's happening to those populations doesn't seem to be used in the Indian literature. So that there is work there, but you have to hunt for it, because it's on things like the feminization of agriculture or labor economics of the village. It isn't specifically on this problem. I mean, if you look at the Chinese press, in the Chinese newspapers, you know, every day you can see a story about the problems left behind people are facing. Yeah, exactly. You don't find a similar kind of discourse in the Indian context. So I think this is more of a conceptual and labeling difference than it is a real absence of work on these things. But it makes it very hard for academic researchers to get to the literature they need.
And also, I'd just like to add here, when you're comparing any form of migration between India and China, even though at the base those phenomena may be the same, in the sense that you're seeing large groups of people moving from, the very fact that in India we sort of qualify it as free abode, you can go and live anywhere, those categories of migration don't get caught in statistics like they do in China because of that very clear policy difference.
Can I
Please.
With a question for Danielle as well. Can I just slip that in while I've got the microphone? I was very curious about this category of economic migrants that you were talking about. You did do some work to define this, but I guess what I wanted to know was how economic migrants are any different from any other kind of migrants you might see. I mean, what makes you
marriage migrants?
Economic? Yeah, marriage migrants.
For women, that's a huge category.
From my study, I saw a lot of women who would never define themselves as economic migrants. They came to Bombay because their husbands were there and they came with the children. But when they got there, they started work and they became, I suppose, in a sense, economic migrants.
No, but for example, in China, actually, you do really have a category of marriage migrants. Now, for example, Chinese women marrying into Taiwan, for example.
Yeah.
So, or Filipino women into Taiwan, it's actually finding, anyway, quite interesting categories.
And I think the way what Iris is talking about as well, is how do we categorize these
exactly.
migrants,
Exactly.
Migrants, all these categories seem really to overlap, and I think it's a problem for all of us.
Yeah, great. I think there were some questions for you, Danielle, yes. Would you like to take the first round, and then I'll open it for another round?
I think this question about economic migrants and the category of economic migrants. The reason that I want to kind of define it for my own research in such a broad way is that I think it's very necessary to try to disaggregate somewhat in order to rethink the ways in which we can look at migration as a whole. I think that when you look at the economic changes and what has driven economic changes in development, yes, obviously the large migration of labor has had a huge influence on the development that's gone on in both India and China. But the movement of people who are starting their own businesses and coming into the cities to do so is also significant. And it's significant both economically and culturally. So that's why I wanted to start thinking about that in a slightly different way. I just want to say one thing to Charlotte about this category left behind and the idea that the emptiness in China, the villages and the sort of fullness of the urban situation. Come to the film screening. You'll enjoy it. I was asked about the biggest changes in portrayal of economic migrants in the past 20 years. I think one of the factors that's influenced the change of portrayal of economic migrants has been the change in the way that the countryside is portrayed and the role of the countryside in India as a kind of exotic ideal. It's actually quite exoticized in movies like DDLJ. It's like these beautiful mustard fields and everything's lovely. And that's changed somewhat, and the focus for romantic locations has changed very significantly. Everybody will have noticed that we've moved to not even just Switzerland, but after Switzerland,
Rio is the latest.
Rio, Australia, Las Vegas, whereas before everybody was having a romantic time in Kashmir. So Kashmir I think is not quite cinematic anymore in Bollywood. So I think that's been a significant influence on the kinds of ways in which rural to urban migrants are portrayed. And I do think there's also been, of course, an influence of the diaspora and their economic clout in the market on that as well. Having said that, one of the examples that I gave very quickly, and I know I went quickly through it, two actually. One was about the character of Silka in the Dirty Picture, who's a very, very rare example of a woman taking some kind of economic control of her life. And it's two different factors for her in that film. Partially that she's going to get married and she doesn't want to, but partially that she wants to go to the city to become a star. And that's a sort of a reconstruction of an imagination of Tamil cinema that's quite lovely and nostalgic, but also quite challenging in many ways to the norms of standard Bollywood aesthetics. So I would say that is maybe an overlooked example of an economic migration in film, because the emphasis of the film is more on her role as an exotic sex object in film and how she tries to control that. But ultimately, I think, like I was saying, she's broken down by the process in the film. And that tends to happen when you do see these kinds of examples. I was trying to think of another good one, and the only one that I could think of off the top of my head was in Salama Ish. There's which is, sort of one of these linkage movies, hyperlink movies. There's a journalist who has moved from her hometown to, I don't remember, I think it's actually Kolkata. And she's doing, working very professionally and having a great time, and then she's involved in a train accident and loses her memory. And again, her urban life, her life as an independent person, ends in disaster and to be forgotten, and she gets amnesia. So that, I mean, you could read into it. I think that you can take it, sort of both ways. Yeah, I think that answers most of the questions that I was asked. The westernization of Sapna, very quickly. She has some difficulties with language. She doesn't understand, and she uses much more English than other characters in the film. She also she has multiple situations in which she has really hard time understanding sort of cultural norms around her. She doesn't understand why Raju finds it a problem that she's wearing a particular dress and won't go out with her like that. So you could read it a number of different ways. You could read it as a kind of modernization, you could read it as westernization with modernization. It's a very particular point in time, that film, because it's 1992. Yeah, I agree. I agree that it's problematic. I absolutely agree that it's problematic.
And also, actually, you've also got to keep in mind that, when you start looking at cinema in India, especially in terms of representation, and if you look at migration, it's a very, very early motive. It's a black and white cinema motive, where again you're actually touching precisely what you talked about, issues of westernization in urban culture, rural idyllic, traditional sanctity, etc., 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 versus urban, fast, alien, corrupt, amoral.
And
you find that whole.
Sorry, to interrupt. There are so many characters who have Western names who are villains in sort of 70s.
Especially women.
Yeah, so there's that. And then, one of the main themes of my research is actually about this sort of absorbing in the contemporary, the Indian and Chinese, in the Indian Chinese film paradigms, the desire to absorb new Chinese signified and Indo-Indianified examples of modernity and contemporary life into a redesigned authenticity. So it's trying to make those modernities integrated into the idea of the modern and the citizen, the modern Indian and the modern Chinese citizen.
Yeah.
So I definitely take your point. I think that there at certain points in Hindi cinema and Bollywood, there are these kind of ambiguities about where modernism and modernity begins and where westernization ends and this kind of thing. Characters who have American-ish accents. One of my favorite movies in John Goyaro, there's a wonderful character who's got an incredible accent. He's putting on an American accent.
Okay, you had another question.
Thank you. My first question is for Daniel. Daniel, you would agree that both India and China are melting pots of ethnic population. So I'm very curious about how I'm curious about the relationship between economic migration and the formation of regional and national identity. And what I wanted to ask you was, what relationship you have observed in the cinematic representation, especially in the context of China. And I did what a wonderful talk, and thank you. My question to you is, you have spoken about the coercive power of state. You couldn't talk about it more? Now, the recent focus in India right now is this look east policy. And so that's especially like, we are investing quite a lot in having a very good relationship with China. So how do you see the agenda of this Tibetan education policy within India, which has been authorized within the Indian Constitution, and you mentioned that, being influenced or evolved or devolved?
Okay, I'm going to go for Iris. You also had another question from that lady here, from that student. You also had a question for Iris. No, the one sitting next to you. Yeah, you had a question.
She already asked.
She already, yeah, but you had one, right? So maybe you'll take both hers and this
sure.
one first.
Do I have to use the mic? No? So, I'm very happy you brought up this. That's exactly those slides I skipped. So, for the higher education part, based on my sort of preliminary study in Xiahe, that is, the preferable policy is actually the reason caused the institutional failure for Tibetan students. Because there are two types of schools, then you can decide which one to go. If you go for the Tibetan schools, okay, then you can learn in Tibetan language. Your Tibetan language will be perfect. But after the entrance exam, which English is not there, and your Chinese is not good enough to get a job in the Han-dominated society, then you end up in a rather comfortable side in the college. That would be ethnic minority college and doing Tibetan studies or Tibetan history. And then you come back to your hometown as the local officer working in the local government. It's a cycle running there. But if you dare to step out a bit at the age of 11 or 12, if you are academically well-performed kids, then you will be extracted from your own people to be a member of Tibet class, Xizangban, in the Eastern Coast residential schools. And you will live for 10 years in segregation and totally alienated from the students around. And that is perfectly shown in the recent article that is wrote by Tsering Wasser. I think you must have read it. Yes, and she gave a perfect metaphor on that. The paragraph that she kept on comb her hair when she reached Sichuan, because the hair quality she got in the high plateau, and when it meets the humidity in Sichuan Pandi, then it became so curled, and she want to make it straight, just as Han Chinese. So this decision of taking which school, it depends on what job perspective you expect to do in the future. And most of the time in Xiahe, the place I did the research, that decision was actually made by the parents. So I find that the parents from a white collar kind of background, teachers, local government officers, they send their children to the common school where the language medium is actually Chinese, with no Tibetan class provided there, totally against the bilingual education, but they don't care as long as they get good percentage students to college. And for those who are really loyal to their national identity, that also happened in Amdo, how much they appreciate their cultural heritage there. They even invented a nomad school. Yeah, kept in the tent and to get the text from the oral literature, get the text from the songs and the histories, and then to provide authentic, what they think authentic education for their own children. So on the other case in India, that if I might say, I analyzed the narratives of the students. Well, the school education in Tibet is more like to remove the wildness and then put yourself into the Chineseness, which is Zhonghua Minzu. And in India, education is a way to equip yourself to face the uncertainty as a refugee in India. So every day you have to deal, every day the Tibetan refugees have to deal with the uncertainties come from the security issue, the economic vulnerable status in the society, and whether I can get a job in the Indian market. As the string case you mentioned that in the public sector, if I can get a job there. So that is also the reason why the Tibetan refugees, they may act like a rent seeker when they first come to India to look for education. But they will not settle here. They will not settle here. They will seek for a citizenship guaranteed context and then move along to another country again. To the United States or whatever. People, you often get criticized by that, but that is also because after the past century, Tibetan has been living on this continuous experience of insecurity in India, and conflicts constantly happen between the Tibetan settlement and the local Indian village because the Tibetan settlement usually more wealthier than the local village, and also not to mention the dispute about properties and business, all these things. So that is also the reason why they choose to migrate again. It perfectly makes sense. So did I answer all your questions?
Yeah, I had one for you while you're at it. You sort of remarked, I mean, apart from other very, very interesting things, a lot of which have been discussed really, that people stopped, that migration fell after 2008. You actually have data mentioning.
Yes.
I was curious why that happened. Why 2008?
It's because the uprising happened in March in 2008, and the border army.
Cut down as well.
Yes, the border army has become more strict on the transgressor, and also another reason is because of the two basics education policy that has been implemented in Tibet, that they give serious penalty to parents because they have this hukou system, so they know how many kids you have. So if you don't send your kids to the local school, then they will know, and they will give serious penalty on that. So that also creates a new form of migrating family there in Xiahe. That is out of this discussion. So I'll come back to your question. That is also my sort of, the thing I've been thinking. So with the emerging closer and closer economic ties between India and his maybe Bai, then would that endanger the persistence of the habitation of Tibetan refugees here in this education sense? I don't think so.
I don't think so.
I don't think so. Because as you can see, in 2013, the Department of Human Resources actually put the governance of the Central Tibetan School, finally financed by Indian central government. The governance shift to the Department of Education under the exile government. So on the reason, based on my interview, I didn't get any actual document. Based on my interview, is because they think the quality of education they're giving there in the Tibetan school are better than the local Indian public school. While in the Central Tibetan School, 40 to 45% of the students are local Indian students. Yes, 40 to 45% are local Indian students. They sort of mingle together, and most of the staff, faculty are Indians. Yes, and only the teacher for Tibetan language is Tibetan. So this kind of trust, I think that says something. About.
And also, there's been a slight shift since the governance of the Tibetan community went away from the traditional Dalai Lama's office to elected government of Tibet.
Yeah.
So that has to a greater degree formalized a relationship between between the Indian government. And how it actually plays out in the longer run is something we're all rather curious about. But that has certainly happened now.
Do you think that is highly formalized?
I think it's getting more and more formalized from what I know. I mean, especially with the state government. So, for example, the government of Himachal Pradesh, where the government in exile is located,
yes,
is now formalizing a far greater relationship.
Yes,
with
that I
Tibetan,
agree.
Tibetan. Anyway, thank you all very much.